Welcome back, and it's been about a week, and we'll continue with our exploration of deep water mathematics. And the last time I had explored a couple of equations that looked at uniqueness, and particularly a signature for uniqueness across different kinds of organizations. And today I'm going to explore, using the signature of uniqueness as a starting point, a couple of equations for cultural strength, or rather, what characterizes a monoculture versus a very diverse culture. So just to summarize, the equation for uniqueness was characterized by signature such that you had a primary element X with a relative strength A plus some secondary elements Y with a relative strength B that may repeat itself from 0 to n times, and such that X is an element from one of the sets of the set of omniscience, the set of omnipresence, the set of omnipower, the set of omniloving. The secondary element, or the secondary elements, were derived also from the same sets. So it could be elements from the set of omniscience, the set of omnipresence, the set of omnipower, and the set of omniloving. And A and B are both integers, such that A is greater than B. And that was the equation that we had derived for characterizing the uniqueness of an organization. And an organization could be a person, it could be a team, it could be a department, it could be a corporation, it could be a market, it could be a country. So the hypothesis is that any organization has a primary strength or reason for being that is accompanied by various kinds of secondary elements. So, for instance, you could have an organization whose main purpose is compassion, but then there are many, there could be, say, 2 to 10 to 15 secondary elements, and so on. Now, when we think about culture, I want to characterize two kinds of cultures, just to draw the spectrum of possibilities, so that we could have a culture such that, of course, the primary element is always the same X, but the secondary elements might vary. But I would hypothesize that we could have something called a monoculture, where the secondary element is the same across the organization, or no matter how deep we go in the organization. So at level 1, so for example, let's assume that's the executive level, we have some primary element Y, and then at level N in the organization, so where N just roughly characterizes distribution by horizontally and distribution vertically, we would have the exact same secondary element. So in this sense, what we have is that we have the set of elements, so elements from this thing that we're calling the Y set is the same. So if it's, say, some constant K, it might be 3 elements at this level, it's exactly the same n iterations later. So this, I would say, defines a monoculture, where you have basically the elements of the Y set at some point n, which is equal to the elements of the Y set at the initial point 1. So that is an equation for a monoculture. By contrast, we could have a very diverse culture where, of course, the X element remains the same, so the primary reason for being for that organization is always the same, but the y element may vary radically. So, for instance, at the executive level, you may have just a subset of a couple of elements, so say k elements. But then as you go deeper into the organization and across the organization, there's a lot, you see a lot of different elements that support this primary configuration of xa plus yb repeated. And so, in a sense, we're seeing here that the elements, the y elements, at some iteration n is radically different, and what's more, that there's an increase in the y elements as you iterate down to a level n. So the behavior here is such that you have elements of the y set, and when I say y set, what I mean is the set of elements that are derived from this universal set or set of universal possibilities here. So it may start off with some number k, but then it grows exponentially as you iterate to a level n. And so its behavior is radically different. And the way that I would characterize this equation is that you have elements of a y set at some iteration n that is proportional to an exponential function 1 plus g to the power n, where g is some growth factor, and this growth factor might change several times. So for instance, it might be a growth factor of 2 to here, then a growth factor of 3 over here, a growth factor of 4 over here as the organization becomes more and more complex and diverse. And this here, this equation, I would characterize as the equation for a diverse culture. And the point is that if we think about very practically, suppose you have a organization that's configured like this. So this kind of describes its equation for culture. Then if it faces changes circumstances, which happens all the time, its ability to adapt or to change from within is very limited, because it has the same kind of imprint just spread across its organization. And you know, there may be a particular kind of situation in which this kind of organization would do very well, but over time such an organization, I would hypothesize, would destabilize and would go extinct. Whereas you have an organization like this, if it's faced with changing circumstances, then it has from within many, many different founts of creativity and innovation that can inform its primary element X, and that can create such a equilibrium for it that it can meet circumstance in many, many different ways. And therefore, I would say that this kind of culture, this diverse culture characterized by a vast number of Y elements, is going to be far more sustainable over the long run.